It was a moment that took everyone by surprise. Ibrahim Traoré, the young president of Burkina Faso, paid tribute to American activist Charlie Kirk in a way that stunned audiences and left people reeling with both respect and curiosity. His words were powerful, humble, and bold, sparking a wave of debates across the U.S. and around the world. What began as a respectful acknowledgement of a fellow advocate turned into a shocking and heartfelt revelation, leaving many to ask, why would this leader from West Africa feel such a deep connection to an American conservative figure? The answer would come days later, when the world watched as Traoré took the stage at a memorial service in Washington, D.C. The night was supposed to be uneventful. At Utah Valley University, Charlie Kirk entered the stage with his signature confidence, ready to speak to a room full of students about the values of freedom and faith. But in an instant, everything changed. A gunshot rang out, sending shockwaves through the room. The students screamed, dropping to the floor as chaos quickly spread. Security rushed forward, but it was too late. Charlie Kirk, the 31-year-old voice of conservative America, lay motionless on the floor, his microphone rolling away, echoing through the now silent hall. The cameras froze on the scene. News outlets picked up the story, spreading the tragedy like wildfire across the nation. The United States woke up to heartbreaking news the next day. Charlie Kirk, dead at 31. A mixture of grief, anger, and confusion swept through the country. Flags were lowered, and churches opened their doors for those who wanted to grieve. Even those who had often disagreed with Kirk on political issues found themselves united in mourning, as his death transcended political divides. A young father was gone. A wife was widowed. Children would grow up without their father. America was in pain, and everyone felt it. Amid the grief, something unexpected happened. From thousands of miles away, a message came from an unlikely source. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. Few Americans knew much about Traoré, but his words struck a chord. He called Charlie Kirk his brother in conviction, a sentiment that seemed unusual coming from a leader of a West African nation who had little direct connection to the conservative American figure. It was this heartfelt message that caught the world's attention, raising questions. Why would Traoré, a relatively unknown president, feel so strongly about someone who was not only from a different continent, but had a political stance that differed greatly from his own? This question lingered as preparations for the memorial service in Washington, D.C. began. The service, which would be broadcast live to the world, was set to honor Charlie Kirk's life and legacy. Leaders, citizens, and international figures were invited, and among those who accepted the invitation was Ibrahim Traoré. His attendance was a surprise, and commentators quickly began debating the reasons behind his decision. Was this a political move, or was there something deeper at play? As the day of the memorial approached, security in Washington tightened, and the streets were lined with black cars and military bands preparing for the solemn event. Inside the cathedral, every seat was draped in white cloth, with the front row reserved for Charlie Kirk's grieving family. As reporters caught sight of Traoré's name on the guest list, whispers began to circulate. What could this young African leader possibly say in the midst of so much grief? What connection did he have to Charlie Kirk that would bring him all the way to Washington for this moment? On the morning of the memorial, a cold and gray day in the nation's capital, the world was about to witness an unforgettable moment. The truth behind Traoré's connection to Kirk was about to be revealed, and it would leave audiences speechless. As the crowd gathered outside, holding candles and photographs of Charlie Kirk, a sense of solemnity filled the air. Police cars blocked the streets, and news vans lined the sidewalks, their cameras ready to capture history. Inside the cathedral, the atmosphere was thick with emotion. History felt like it was about to be made. Then a motorcade arrived, and all eyes turned. Out stepped President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, dressed in a simple dark suit with no entourage or flashy displays of power. His presence was striking, and reporters scrambled, asking, "Why is he here?" As he walked into the cathedral, the room fell silent. Heads turned, Whispers circulated, and many nodded in respect. With steady steps, he made his way to the front pew, bowing his head toward the grieving family. Cameras clicked, capturing the image of an unexpected foreign leader in an American church, ready to honor a man he had never campaigned with, but clearly respected. But no one knew yet that Ibrahim Traoré was not just offering condolences. He had come with words that would move the nation. The ceremony began with a soft hymn from the choir, their voices rising like fragile prayers. Charlie's widow clutched her children, her face streaked with tears, as tributes poured in from U.S. leaders, pastors, senators, and friends. Each speaker added to the overwhelming grief that filled the cathedral. The stained glass windows above seemed to hold the collective sorrow of a nation in mourning. Then a hush fell over the room as the master of ceremonies made an announcement no one expected. We now invite His Excellency Ibrahim Traoré, President of the Transition of Burkina Faso, to share his words. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Who was this young foreign president, and what could he possibly add to such an American tragedy? As Traoré rose, adjusting his jacket, the sound of his footsteps echoed through the silent hall. He carried no notes, just a steady gaze. Every camera focused on him, sensing that whatever he was about to say was meant for hearts, not politics. He looked first at Charlie's widow and children, his voice soft but firm, cutting through the room. "Madam, your husband's blood was not shed in vain," he began. His voice still echoes not only in America but in Africa too. The words hung in the air and a collective breath was drawn. Traoré paused, allowing the silence to settle. In Burkina Faso, too many mothers bury their sons. Too many children ask why their fathers never return. His voice grew stronger and the room fell deeper into silence. Today, I stand not just for myself, but for every nation that believes truth is worth dying for. A quiet ripple of emotion spread through the crowd, and even those who had initially doubted his presence were now fully captivated. His words were not political speeches. They were raw, personal, and heartfelt. In that moment, the memorial service stopped feeling like an American event. It became a global one. Traoré's tribute turned Charlie Kirk's death into a universal reflection on freedom, loss, and the shared pain of violence. And he wasn't finished yet. "I know the pain of bullets," he continued, his voice unwavering. "In my country, young men are hunted because they dare to dream of freedom. Charlie Kirk dreamed too." His words struck at the heart of not just American grief, but also the struggles of nations where freedom is under threat. That is why his death is not only America's loss, it is Africa's loss. It is humanity's loss. A wave of quiet murmurs rippled through the hall, and Charlie's widow tightened her arms around her children, tears flowing more freely now. A student in the back whispered, "He understands us more than our own leaders." What Traoré had done was more than just speak. He had shared in a collective pain, pouring out his heart to strangers who suddenly felt seen. In that moment, he was not just a foreign leader, he was a voice of global solidarity. His words had pierced deeper than anyone could have expected. The room was heavy with anticipation, a profound stillness that seemed to weigh on everyone present. Reporters, pens in midair, hesitated. Should they capture this moment in words or simply absorb the gravity of what was unfolding? Ibrahim Traoré's presence felt like an unspoken force. There was something urgent in his demeanor, as though he was about to share a truth far too significant to delay. Taking a deep breath, Traoré steadied himself at the podium. The moment shifted. His voice, once calm, grew more resolute and pointed. "I must speak honestly," he began. "When a voice is cut short by violence, the gunman isn't the sole culprit. It's the environment of hatred that allows such evil to fester." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The words were jarring. No one had expected this kind of bluntness at a memorial. Traoré turned toward the cameras, his gaze unwavering, as if speaking directly to every viewer at home. In Africa, too many courageous leaders have been silenced by foreign powers. And here in America, You bury your sons because you fail to protect those who speak freely. His statement was like a sharp blow, causing many to pause, reflecting on the uncomfortable truth that surrounded them. Some of those present gripped their hearts, while others lowered their eyes. Even President Trump, seated near the front, was visibly moved by the weight of the words. This wasn't just a tribute, it was a mirror held up to America itself, forcing a nation to reckon with its own internal struggles. What had started as a memorial now seemed to shift into something more profound, a call for reflection, for truth. The audience sat in rapt silence, each person frozen, caught in the powerful wave of what Traoré was saying. Then, with a change in his tone, Traoré added something that would change the course of the event. I didn't come here just to mourn. I came to deliver something important. Every eye in the room sharpened. Cameras zoomed in, and the scribes gripped their pens tighter, their attention fixed. Even Charlie's widow, tearful but composed, looked up, waiting for the next revelation. Before he passed, Charlie Kirk sent me a letter, Traoré announced. The room inhaled as one. This revelation caught everyone off guard. No one knew of this letter, not even those closest to Charlie. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation as Traoré reached inside his coat, pulling out a single folded sheet of paper. His hands trembled ever so slightly as he unfolded it, and the sound of the paper creaking under the pressure seemed to echo in the hushed space. The entire cathedral seemed to be holding its breath as Traoré read aloud. He glanced at Charlie's widow and children before beginning. Charlie wrote, "If this letter is ever read, it means something has happened to me. But know this, my fight was never for me. It was for my children, for the students who listened, for the future of the country I loved more than my own life." The widow's sobs broke the silence. The room, already full of grief, seemed to deepen in sorrow. Traoré paused, his own voice thick with emotion. The crowd sat still, witnessing what felt less like a funeral and more like a defining moment in history. A bridge had formed between two worlds, two nations, united by shared values and grief. The cameras zoomed in further, capturing the gravity of the moment. Traoré inhaled deeply and then continued, his voice calm but heavy. "There's more, and it's even harder to bear." The audience sat on edge, hearts pounding in unison. What could this letter possibly reveal next? Traoré scanned the page, his eyes scanning the words with quiet deliberation, before reading the next lines aloud. Charlie had written, "If I fall, do not let anger consume you. Do not let bitterness take hold of what I stood for. Tell my children that their father didn't die out of hatred for the world, but because he loved it enough to risk everything." A profound stillness gripped the cathedral. The weight of Charlie's final message sank in. His sacrifice was not born of bitterness or revenge, but from a deep love for the world and its future. For many, this moment transcended the immediate tragedy. It became a universal reflection on the cost of standing for one's beliefs. The atmosphere in the cathedral was thick with emotion, as Ibrahim Traoré'S words hit the room like a fiery force. In an instant, the audience was enveloped in a profound silence. Mothers gripped their children more tightly, their hearts weighed down by the pain of what was being said. Fathers lowered their heads in quiet shame, recognizing how little they had sacrificed in comparison to the sacrifices others had made. The widow, trembling, leaned forward, her grief overwhelming her. Her tears soaked through her black dress as she whispered to her children, "He loved you. He loved you so much." Around her, the audience was visibly moved, some unable to contain their own sobs. A reporter sitting near the aisle dropped her pen, her face hidden in her hands as she wept, unable to look away. Traoré continued, his voice steady as he read Charlie's words. "If I am unable to return home, let others rise and rise with courage, not fear." His voice cracked, and for a moment, even he had to pause, closing his eyes as though to regain control. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was the anguish of a father's final plea for his children, a moment so powerful that the room seemed to hold its collective breath. After a brief pause, Traoré raised the letter again. His face hardened, yet the sorrow in his eyes remained. "The last part of this letter," he said, "is why I am here today." Every person in the room leaned in, eyes wide, hanging on his every word. Charlie had written, "If I am silenced, do not only focus on the man who fired the shot. Look at those who gave him reason, the ones who stirred the hatred, the ones who profit from silencing voices like mine." Gasps echoed throughout the room, and the widow, visibly shaken, gripped the pew in front of her, as if she were holding on to the very floor beneath her. These words hinted at something far deeper than just one tragic incident, something much larger than a single assassin. The audience was on edge, feeling the enormity of what was being said. Traoré slowly folded the letter and held it against his chest, his expression somber. "This isn't just Charlie's farewell," he declared. "This is his warning, and I promised him that if this moment ever came, I would speak his truth without hesitation." The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. Some wiped away tears, others sat still, processing the revelation. What had begun as a memorial was transforming into something much more. A revelation, a confrontation with uncomfortable truths that had remained hidden for too long. As Traoré finished reading the letter, the cathedral seemed to shiver in the weight of the moment. Whispers spread quickly throughout the crowd, some people gripping their hands tightly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The widow's shoulders shook as she held both her grief and Charlie's final message close to her heart. A young man in the back, his face streaked with tears, suddenly stood and shouted, "He's right! We have to listen!" His voice echoed through the cathedral, a cry that seemed to speak for everyone. Security guards rushed in, unsure whether to intervene, but the crowd, moved by the intensity of the moment, began to nod in agreement, many of them openly weeping. They weren't angry with Traoré, they were shaken awake by him. In the back, television commentators exchanged looks of realization, sensing the storm that would soon erupt across the nation. The cameras captured every tear, every gasp, every hand pressed to a heart. The nation itself seemed to hold its breath, the weight of the moment settling over everyone present. Traoré stood quietly, letting the silence stretch, not rushing to speak, but allowing the significance of his message to settle in. He had just delivered Charlie Kirk's last words, and their impact was undeniable. The cathedral felt alive with emotion, as though the very walls resonated with the power of what had been shared. Finally, Traoré raised his hand gently, signaling for quiet once again. "What you choose to do with this truth is not for me to decide," he said, his voice calm but unwavering. "But I promised your brother, your father, your husband, that I would make sure his voice was not silenced. Today, I honor that promise." His words struck deeper than any political address could. He wasn't lecturing. He was standing as a witness to the kind of pain that transcends borders. "In my country," he continued, "we bury young men every week. Mothers weep in the streets, fighting for survival against forces stronger than us. Yet here, in the most powerful country on earth, you too are losing your sons. Tell me, is a life in Burkina Faso less valuable than a life in America? No. We share the same tears. We share the same prayers." The audience erupted in sobs, many recognizing the universality of the grief that had been laid bare. For the first time, many Americans saw Africa not as a distant place, but as a mirror reflecting their own struggles. Traoré was not dividing the room. He was uniting it, reminding everyone that pain speaks the same language all over the world. As Traoré stepped away from the podium, the cathedral seemed to vibrate with the emotion he had stirred. The silence that followed felt like an eternity, a moment of collective reflection that no one would ever forget. As Ibrahim Traoré's words hung in the air, the gravity of the moment took hold. The crowd, already deeply moved, could no longer remain silent. Reporters, their hands shaking, struggled to write, many pausing to wipe away tears as they processed what had just transpired. The widow rose to her feet, her voice barely a whisper as she placed a trembling hand over her heart. "Thank you," she said softly, her gratitude filled with sorrow. Her children, still in shock, stood beside her, clinging to each other. It felt as though their father's spirit had been passed through Traoré, a connection that spanned continents. The crowd, overcome with emotion, responded not with loud applause but with a solemn, unified gesture. Some stood, offering their slow, respectful applause, while others sank to their knees, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. Their tears stained the polished marble floors, and outside, crowds gathered on the streets, chanting Charlie's name as they watched the memorial on large screens. The name echoed across Washington, a shared cry that transcended the walls of the cathedral. This was no longer just a memorial, it had transformed into something monumental. While no one could predict the debates or discussions to follow, all present that day understood one thing. They had witnessed a moment that would remain etched in history. Ibrahim Traoré had arrived quietly, but now he left as the bearer of a powerful legacy, one that could not be silenced. As Traoré stepped away from the podium, the atmosphere in the cathedral shifted. The audience was not clapping for show, but in deep respect. There was no excitement, only the collective weight of the truth that had been spoken. People hugged strangers, praying together, united in shared sorrow. Outside, thousands gathered, their faces upturned to the screens, chanting Charlie's name, the echo of their voices filling the streets. The news media scrambled to broadcast Traoré's words, rushing to replay clips across America's homes. Some anchors, too emotional to continue, faltered live on air. In cities like Dallas, New York, and beyond, people lit candles and held vigils for a man whose last message had been carried by a leader from halfway across the world. In Burkina Faso, families gathered around radios and televisions, connected by a shared grief they hadn't expected to feel. Social media exploded with heartfelt posts and tributes. "I never imagined I'd cry like this," read one. "Traoré spoke the truth we all needed to hear." The message was everywhere. What was meant to be a quiet memorial had ignited a global wave of solidarity. America was shaken, and the world watched as this moment unfolded. After the ceremony, the widow asked for a private moment with Traoré, away from the public eye. In a quiet room behind the cathedral, she stood before him, still trembling. Her children clung to her side, their faces marked with grief. Through her tears, she whispered, "You gave my husband back to me. Through your words, you brought him back. Thank you." Traoré, with a deep bow of respect, spoke softly. "It is I who should thank him. His courage endures beyond his last breath. My hope is that his children will grow, knowing they are never fatherless. The world carries his name now." The widow took his hand, and for a moment they stood together in silence. Two worlds, bound by grief but united by faith, met in that small, quiet room. A photographer, unnoticed, captured this intimate moment. The widow, her children, and Traoré, hands clasped in prayer. That photograph would later be seen around the world, symbolizing a rare, raw moment of connection. For the family, this was not about politics. It was about healing, about finding dignity in sorrow and companionship in pain. The stillness of that room became a testament to the power of shared grief, and love rising even from the darkest places. By the end of the week, America was still grappling with the impact of the memorial. Schools replayed Traoré's speech in classrooms. Churches incorporated his words into their sermons. Leaders debated what it meant for the future of the nation. But for ordinary people, something had shifted. Charlie Kirk's death was no longer just another headline. It had become a call to stand for truth and justice, no matter the cost. Across both America and Africa, families whispered prayers not just for Charlie's widow and children, but for Ibrahim Traoré, the young African leader who had carried the fallen man's message with such humility and strength. What the world had witnessed was more than a tribute. It was a turning point. Traoré had reminded America of its deeper truths. In the years to come, people would still ask, "Do you remember the day Traoré read Charlie's letter?" That day would never be forgotten, and neither would Charlie Kirk's legacy. If this story moved you, if it brought tears to your eyes, let's keep this memory alive together. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and most importantly, share your thoughts in the comments below. Let the world see that truth and love can never be silenced. Your voice matters. Let's keep it alive.